He was carefully cleaning the floor. But the heiress arrived thinking he was the owner in disguise. Richard Johnson was wiping the marble with a damp cloth for the third time that morning when he heard the sound of the main door opening. At 62, he had learned to be discreet in his work. But something about that sound made him lift his eyes from the shiny floor he was cleaning. "Dad! I finally found you!" shouted a woman's voice echoing through the mansion's hall. Before he could turn completely, Richard felt delicate arms closing around his chest. The shock was so great, he almost knocked over the bucket of water. A young woman with brown hair and a shimmering gold dress hugged him as if she hadn't seen him in years. "Miss, you're mistaken," he began, trying to gently free himself from the hug. "You don't need to pretend anymore, Dad. I know you're hiding from my uncles. I understand your strategy," she said, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes. "But now I'm here to help you." Richard shook his head, confused. For 3 months he had been working at that mansion in the Upper East Side neighborhood of New York City. The house had been closed after the mysterious disappearance of the owner, William Parker, and the cleaning company he worked for had been hired to keep the place in order while the family sorted out legal matters. "Miss, I think there's a misunderstanding here. I'm Richard from the cleaning service. I'm not the owner of this house." The young woman smiled as if he had told a joke. "Of course you are, Dad. You were always this clever. Remember when I was little and you pretended to be someone else when boring visitors came?" She took his calloused hand between hers, soft and perfumed. "I'm Emily, your daughter. I know you haven't seen me in 5 years, but—" "Miss, I never had children," interrupted Richard, his voice coming out louder than he intended. "My wife died 7 years ago, and we were never able to have children." Emily Parker let out a laugh that echoed off the ornate walls. "Dad, you're overdoing the acting. The uncles aren't here now." She leaned in and whispered, "I know you're pretending to have lost your memory to prevent them from taking what's ours, but I brought the documents that prove this house is ours, not theirs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard watched the young woman open an expensive leather bag and pull out a thick envelope. She was pretty, probably around 25 years old, and there was something in her eyes that reminded him of someone, but he couldn't figure out who. "Look," she said, showing a birth certificate. "Emily Parker, daughter of William Parker. This is proof that I am the true heir, not my greedy cousins. My greedy." He took the document carefully, as if it were something sacred. The name William Parker was there, clear as day, the same name he saw on the mail that arrived for the mansion. "But miss, I am not William Parker. I am Richard Johnson." He handed the paper back gently. "I work here cleaning, but I don't live here." Emily put the documents away and stared at him with an expression that mixed determination and sadness. "Dad, I know you're confused. The doctors told me the trauma from the accident may have affected your memory, but don't worry, I will take care of you. We will get our house back together." "What accident?" asked Richard, feeling a chill in his stomach. "The car accident you had last year. That's why you disappeared. You were in the hospital without documents, and when you recovered, you didn't remember who you were." Emily took his hands again. "But I never stopped looking for you." Richard's mind was spinning, trying to process that information. He remembered his life perfectly. Born in Chicago, he moved to New York City at 30, married Rose, worked his whole life in cleaning. He never had children, never had a mansion, never suffered any accidents. "Miss Emily, I need you to listen to me carefully." He took a deep breath. "I have documents that prove who I am. My work card, my ID, everything is in order. I am not your father." "Show me then," she said, crossing her arms. Richard hesitated. His documents were in the small apartment where he lived in Queens. He wasn't in the habit of carrying them during work. "They're at home. But I can go get them if you want." "No need. I believe you have fake documents. My uncles are capable of anything to keep me away from the inheritance." Emily walked to one of the living room armchairs and sat down. "They must have paid someone for you to pretend to be someone else." Richard felt as if he were in a strange dream. He looked around the luxurious room, with its antique furniture and expensive paintings. That house was worth a fortune, he knew that. And now a beautiful young woman was insisting that he was the owner of all that. "Miss, what if I really am not your father? What if you're mistaken?" Emily stood up and approached him again. This time, she looked straight into his eyes with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Dad, you have the same eyes as him, the same color, the same shape. And," she gently touched his face, "you have a small scar here on your chin, just like his." Richard automatically brought his hand to his chin. He really had a small mark there, the result of a fall he had as a child. But many people had scars. "And you have the same height, the same way of walking, even your voice is similar," continued Emily. "When I saw you in the hall, my heart raced. I knew it was you." "But the uniform, the bucket," protested Richard. "Perfect disguise, Dad. Who would suspect that the owner of the house was cleaning his own floor?" Emily smiled with admiration. "You were always brilliant at hiding when necessary." At that moment, a loud knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Both turned toward the sound. "It must be Mrs. Wilson," said Richard, referring to the cleaning company manager. "She comes to check the work every week." "Or it could be my uncle's," whispered Emily, fear in her voice. "They can't find me here." Before Richard could respond, the door opened and a middle-aged woman entered. She wore a dark suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Mr. Parker," said the woman, stopping abruptly upon seeing Richard. "My God, you're back!" Richard felt the floor move beneath his feet. "Miss Jennifer!" exclaimed Emily, running to hug the woman. "I told you I would find him." The woman named Jennifer looked at Richard as if she had seen a ghost. "Mr. William, where have you been all this time? We were all worried." She approached slowly. "Are you all right? You look different." "Doctor, this man claims he is not my father, says he's a cleaning employee," explained Emily. Jennifer adjusted her glasses and examined Richard more closely. "Mr. Parker, I have been your lawyer for 15 years. I recognize you perfectly." She opened the briefcase and took out a photo. "Look here." The photo showed a man elegantly dressed, standing in the same hall where they were now. The man in the photo really had a striking resemblance to Richard. The same height, the same eye color, even the scar on the chin was there. "This isn't possible," murmured Richard, taking the photo with trembling hands. "Mr. Parker," said Jennifer in a gentle voice, "I know the accident was traumatic. Memory loss is more common than we imagine in these cases. But you are home now, with your daughter. Everything will be all right." "An accident?" asked Richard. "You were in a car accident a year ago. When we arrived at the hospital, you had disappeared. We didn't know if you were alive or, well, we knew nothing," explained the lawyer. Emily approached and held Richard's arm. "Dad, you were confused when you left the hospital. You probably didn't know who you were and ended up getting this job with the cleaning company. Without knowing you were cleaning your own house." Richard's head was spinning. All of that was impossible. He clearly remembered his life, Rose, his small apartment. He remembered starting to work at that house 3 months ago when the company got the contract. I need to leave," he said, picking up the bucket and the cloth. "I need to think." "Dad, don't go," shouted Emily, holding his hand. "Please stay, this is your home." "Mr. Parker," said Jennifer, "I can understand your confusion, but we have urgent matters to resolve. Your cousins are trying to take possession of the property. They claim you are dead and that they are the legitimate heirs." "What cousins?" asked Richard, unable to avoid his curiosity. "Robert and Daniel Parker, sons of your deceased brother," explained the lawyer. "They filed a lawsuit to declare presumption of your death and divide the inheritance." "But now that you're back, Dad, they can't do anything," said Emily, excited. Richard looked around once more. The living room was larger than his entire apartment. The furniture probably cost more than he earned in a year. How could he own all of that? "What if I'm really not this William Parker?" he asked. Jennifer and Emily exchanged worried looks. "Mr. Parker," said the lawyer, "I can run some tests to confirm your identity, but physically you are identical to my client, and your daughter recognized you immediately." "Dad, I know it's you." "I have no doubt," said Emily, with tears in her eyes. "Please, don't abandon me again." Richard felt a pang in his chest, seeing the young woman's sadness. For even if he wasn't her father, he didn't want to cause her suffering. "All right," he finally said. "I'll stay a bit longer. But I want to better understand what's happening." Emily smiled through her tears and hugged him again. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you wouldn't leave me alone against the uncles." Jennifer put the documents back in her folder. "Mr. Parker, I suggest we discuss the legal situation. Your cousins have scheduled a hearing for next week. We need to be prepared." "What kind of hearing?" asked Richard. "To officially declare your presumed death and release the inheritance to them," explained the lawyer. "But with your return, we can cancel the process." "And if I'm not really William Parker?" "Then," said Jennifer hesitantly, "then Emily would lose everything. The property would go to her cousins." Richard looked at the young woman, calling him Dad. She seemed so fragile at that moment, so hopeful. How could he destroy her expectations? "Where can I stay tonight?" he asked, surprising himself. "Here, Dad, in your home," said Emily, emotional. "Your room is exactly as you left it." "I'll show you," said Jennifer, "and tomorrow we can start organizing the necessary documents." As they went up the stairs toward the bedrooms, Richard wondered how his life had become so complicated in just one morning. A few hours ago, he was just a janitor working in an empty house. Now, apparently, he was a wealthy man with a daughter who needed his protection. The room Jennifer led him to was larger than his entire apartment. A king-size bed dominated the center, surrounded by dark wood furniture and antique paintings. The windows overlooked a well-kept garden. "This has always been your room, Mr. Parker," said the lawyer. "We kept everything as it was." Richard walked to the window and looked out at the garden. An elderly man was trimming bushes with care and precision. "Who is that man?" he asked. "George Thompson, the gardener. He's worked here for over 20 years, Jennifer replied. "Perhaps talking with him will help recover some memories." "Dad," said Emily, appearing at the door, "I brought some of your clothes from the closet. They should fit perfectly." She held expensive suits, silk shirts, and genuine leather shoes. Richard looked at his worn blue uniform and felt out of place. "Miss Emily, these aren't my sizes," he said, checking a label. "Of course they are, Dad. You always wore a size 42 jacket and 41 shoes." Richard froze. Those were exactly his sizes. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice faltering. "Because I'm your daughter," Emily replied simply. "I know you better than anyone." Jennifer observed the interaction with professional interest. "Mr. Parker, I suggest you rest a bit. Tomorrow we'll start sorting out your legal situation." She headed to the door. "Emily, may I speak with you for a moment?" The two women left, leaving Richard alone in the luxurious room. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his calloused hands. How could he be the owner of this place? He picked up one of the suits Emily had left and held it against his body. The size did seem correct, but that proved nothing. Thousands of men wore those measurements. He walked to a carved wooden desk and opened the first drawer. It was full of papers, but one in particular caught his attention. It was a handwritten letter yellowed with time. "My dear William," the letter began, "I know our situation is complicated, but I can no longer hide the truth. I am expecting your son." Richard stopped reading, feeling his heart race. The letter was addressed to William Parker, but something about it troubled him. The handwriting reminded him of someone he knew, but he couldn't identify who. He continued reading. "I know your social position doesn't allow us to publicly acknowledge our relationship, but I hope you can recognize our son when he is born. He will have the right to know who his father is." The letter was signed simply, "With love, Catherine." "Dad?" called Emily from the door. "May I come in?" Richard quickly put the letter back in the drawer. "Of course, come in." "Did you find anything interesting there?" she asked, approaching the desk. "Just some old papers," Richard lied. Emily sat in the armchair beside the desk. "Dad, I know you're confused. The lawyer explained to me that memory loss is normal after trauma, but I want you to know that I'm here to help you remember everything." "Emily," Richard said carefully, You said you hadn't seen me for 5 years. Why? The young woman lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable. We had a fight. An ugly fight. She took a deep breath. I wanted to study music, but you insisted I study business to take care of the family's affairs. I ended up leaving home and cutting off contact. And your mother? She passed away when I was little. You raised me alone. Emily wiped away a tear. It was just the two of us for a long time until I grew up and became rebellious. Richard felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman. Even if he wasn't really her father, he could understand the pain of losing a mother early and having problems with a father. And now, what do you do for a living? I work as a music teacher at a private school, said Emily, smiling. Ironically, I ended up doing what I always wanted, even without your support at the time. Do you like the work? I love it, but it doesn't pay very well. She laughed ironically. Funny how life turns out, isn't it? Now I need the inheritance I rejected 5 years ago. Richard noticed an honesty in her voice that touched him. Emily didn't seem interested only in the money. Why do you need the inheritance now? Because if my uncles manage to take the house, they'll fire all the employees who've worked here for decades. George, the gardener, is 70 years old and has nowhere to go. Mrs. Miller, who took care of the kitchen, is sick and needs the health insurance. Emily stood up and walked to the window. Besides, you always dreamed of turning part of the property into a music school for underprivileged children. I want to make that dream come true for you. A music school? Asked Richard, surprised. Don't you remember? Emily turned to him. It was your most important project. You wanted to use the back pavilion to create a free conservatory. You said music can change people's lives. Richard felt a shiver. Throughout his life, he had dreamed of working with music. He never had the opportunity to study, but he always loved singing and listening to different rhythms. I always liked music, he admitted. Of course you did. You played the piano beautifully. Emily smiled. Sometimes I heard you playing in the early morning when you thought I was sleeping. Play the piano? Richard looked at his calloused hands. I don't think these hands know how to do anything besides wiping with a rag. Dad, don't talk like that. Emily took his hands. Your hands may be different because of the work you did while you were lost, but the music is in here. She touched his chest. In your heart. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Excuse me, said Jennifer, entering. Mr. Parker, I managed to contact the hospital where you were admitted after the accident. They confirmed that a man with your characteristics was admitted to the emergency room a year ago, but he left before identifying himself. Left? Asked Richard. According to the medical report, the patient was confused and disoriented. He couldn't say his name or where he lived, explained the lawyer. When he woke up on the 3rd day, he simply left the hospital without telling anyone. And there are no records of where he went. None. It was as if he had disappeared. Jennifer sat in a chair. Until today, when Emily found you. Richard shook his head, trying to process the information. But I clearly remember working at the cleaning company for over a year. I remember getting the job, having an interview. Dad, traumas can create false memories, said Emily gently. It's as if your brain invented a story to fill in the empty spaces. Mr. Parker, said Jennifer, I can arrange an appointment with a neurologist. He can better explain what happened. Before Richard could answer, they heard the sound of cars arriving at the property. Jennifer quickly stood up and went to the window. It's them, she said with concern in her voice. Who? Asked Richard. My uncles, replied Emily, turning pale. Robert and Daniel. They can't see me here. Why not? Because they got a court order prohibiting me from entering the property, Emily explained quickly. They claimed I was trespassing and destroying evidence. What evidence? Anything that could prove you're still alive, said Jennifer. They really want you to be declared dead. Richard stood up, feeling a strange anger growing in his chest. He didn't like the idea of people intimidating Emily. What if I go down and talk to them, he suggested. No, said Emily quickly. They're dangerous, Dad. They might try to convince you that you're crazy or sick. Mr. Parker, said Jennifer, I suggest you stay here while I go down to talk to them. I'll say I'm just checking the property. The men's voices could now be heard downstairs. They were loud, authoritative voices. Jennifer, where are you? Shouted a male voice. Stay here, Dad, whispered Emily. Promise you won't go downstairs. Richard nodded, but his curiosity was piqued. He wanted to meet these men who were trying to take Emily's inheritance. Jennifer went downstairs, leaving Richard and Emily alone in the room. Through the window, they could see 2 expensive cars parked at the entrance. 2 men in dark suits were walking toward the house. "What are they like?" asked Richard. "Robert is the older one, in his early 50s. He's a lawyer too, but he mainly works in shady business," explained Emily. "Daniel is younger, around 40. He manages some companies, but he's always had financial troubles." "And are they really my cousins?" "They're the sons of your brother Benjamin, who passed away 3 years ago." Emily stepped away from the window. "Benjamin was completely different from you. He spent money on gambling and drinking. When he died, he left a lot of debts for his sons. So they need the money from this inheritance desperately. Robert is involved in some complicated lawsuits. Daniel owes money to a lot of people." Emily sat on the bed. "For them, your death would solve all their problems." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. From downstairs came increasingly loud voices. It seemed the conversation was turning into an argument. "Jennifer, you're lying," shouted a voice. "We know Emily has been here. The neighbors saw her come in." "So what if she has?" replied Jennifer's voice. "This property hasn't been transferred to you yet." "But there's a court order." "Which can be challenged at any time," interrupted Jennifer. Richard moved closer to the door, trying to hear better. Emily held him by the arm. "Dad, don't go down there. Please." "But they're being aggressive with Jennifer. She knows how to defend herself. She's an experienced lawyer." Emily pulled him back. "If they see you, they'll figure everything out. We're not ready for that confrontation yet." "When will we be?" "When you're better. When you remember who you really are." Emily touched his face. "I need you to trust me, Dad." Richard looked into the young woman's eyes and saw both fear and determination. Even though he wasn't sure of his identity, he felt a strange need to protect her. "All right, I'll stay here." The voices downstairs began to fade, indicating the men were leaving. After a few minutes, Jennifer came back up. "They're gone," she said, looking tired. "But they made several threats." "What kind of threats?" asked Richard. "They said they'll speed up the process to declare you dead, and that they'll find out how Emily got into the house." Jennifer sat down heavily. "Robert insinuated that she might have blackmailed someone to gain access." "Blackmailed who?" "Probably you," said Jennifer, looking at Richard. "If they find out you're alive, they'll claim Emily is manipulating you." "But that's not true." "Of course not, Dad," said Emily. "But they'll make up any story to hurt us." Richard paced around the room, thoughtful. The whole situation was getting more complicated by the minute. "Jennifer," he said finally, "do you really believe I am William Parker?" The lawyer studied him carefully before answering. "Physically, you are identical to my client. Your daughter recognized you immediately, and there are details, small things that only William would know." "What kind of things?" "Like the scar on your chin, your clothing sizes, your preference for music." Jennifer picked up the folder and took out more photos. "Look at these pictures carefully. The photos showed the same man in different situations, in business meetings, at social events, playing piano at a party. In all of them, the resemblance to Richard was striking." "But many people can have similar features," said Richard. "True, but there's something else." Jennifer hesitated. "William had a specific birthmark on his left shoulder shaped like a crescent moon." Richard felt his blood run cold. Automatically, he touched his left shoulder. He had exactly that mark. "How do you know that?" he asked with a trembling voice. "Because I helped William resolve a life insurance issue years ago. They required a full medical exam, including recording all birthmarks." Emily noticed the shocked expression on Richard's face. "Dad, what is it?" Without saying a word, Richard lifted his shirt and showed his left shoulder. There was the crescent-shaped mark, exactly as Jennifer had described. "My God," murmured Emily. "It really is you." Richard sat on the bed feeling dizzy. How was it possible to have the same birthmark as that man? This can't be a coincidence," he said. "Of course it can't, Dad." Emily sat beside him. "You are William Parker. You're my father." "But I remember my whole life. Rose, my marriage, my job." Richard held his head in his hands. "Mr. Parker," said Jennifer gently, "I know it's hard to accept, but all the evidence points to the same conclusion. The trauma from the accident created an alternate personality, with memories that seem real but are constructions of your mind to deal with the memory loss." "Did Rose exist?" asked Richard. "We found no records of any marriage for you," replied Jennifer. "William was never officially married. But I remember everything about her, her face, her voice, our time together." "Dad," said Emily, taking his hand, "maybe Rose was someone special in your life that you lost. Maybe the trauma turned that loss into a memory of marriage." Richard looked out the window, seeing the gardener still working on the bushes. Everything felt so unreal. "What if I never recover the real memories?" "That doesn't matter," said Emily firmly. "What matters is that you're here now. We can build new memories together." "Mr. Parker," said Jennifer, "we need to decide how to proceed. The hearing is in 5 days. We need time to organize the necessary documentation." "What documentation?" "Proof that you are alive, medical exams, perhaps testimonies from people who can attest to your identity," explained the lawyer. "Jennifer," said Emily, "do you think my uncles will easily accept my father's return?" The lawyer hesitated before answering. "Honestly, no. They will question everything. They might claim that you are forging evidence, that you hired someone to impersonate William." She looked at Richard. "Especially because you don't remember anything. So what do we do?" "We need irrefutable proof. DNA tests, perhaps. And it would be good if you remembered some specific details that only William would know." Richard stood up and walked to the desk. He opened the drawer where he had kept Catherine's letter. "What if I tell you about something I found here?" he asked, showing the letter. Emily took the letter and read it quickly. Her expression changed as she read. "Dad, you never told me about Catherine." "Do you know this person?" asked Richard. "No, but—" Emily looked at the date of the letter. "This letter is from 25 years ago. I am 24. Jennifer took the letter and examined it. "This is indeed a woman's handwriting," she said, "and it talks about a pregnancy." "Do you think that—" began Richard. "That you had another child you didn't know about," completed Emily. "It's possible, Father. You've always been private about your personal life. But if this son exists, he would also have a right to the inheritance," said Jennifer. "And my uncles don't know about him," added Emily. "That could complicate their plans even further." Richard sat down again, feeling the weight of all those revelations. "How can I find out if this son exists?" "We can hire a private investigator," suggested Jennifer. "With the name Catherine and the date on the letter, we might be able to track down this woman. And if she's still alive, then she can confirm your identity and tell us about your son," said Emily hopefully. "But it might take time, and the hearing is in 5 days. True, but it's an important lead." Jennifer carefully put the letter away. "I'll start the investigation today." At that moment, they heard a soft knock on the door. "Mr. William?" called an elderly male voice. "It's George the gardener," whispered Emily. "Come in," said Richard. The door opened, and a man with white hair and a sun-weathered face entered timidly. When he saw Richard, his eyes filled with tears. "Mr. William, it's so good to have you back," said George, emotion in his voice. "George," said Emily, "my father is having memory troubles. He might not recognize you right away." The gardener nodded with understanding. "Mr. William, I've worked for you for 20 years. I've cared for this garden since you bought the house." George stepped closer. "You always said that plants were like people. They need care and patience to grow." Richard looked out the window at the well-kept garden. There was something in those words that struck a chord in his heart. "George," he said carefully, "can you tell me some things about me?" "Of course, sir." George smiled. "You always woke up early and came to have coffee in the garden. You liked to listen to the birds singing. You said music was in everything in nature." Richard felt a shiver. He had always loved listening to birds sing. "And you played the piano every night after dinner. I would listen from the back house where I live," continued George. They were sad songs, but beautiful ones. What kind of songs? Chopin mostly. You said that Chopin understood the sadness of the human heart. Richard was surprised. Chopin was his favorite composer, though he had never learned to play his pieces. George, asked Emily, do you remember my father ever mentioning a woman named Catherine? The gardener thought for a moment. Catherine. Catherine. He scratched his head. Yes. Miss Catherine, who used to come here sometimes, many years ago, a pretty young lady with dark hair. What was she like? Asked Richard. Delicate, polite, always greeted me and the other staff. Not like some visitors who barely looked at us. George smiled fondly. And you were different when she was here, happier. What happened to her? One day she stopped coming. You were very sad for a while. You even asked me if I had any news of her. The gardener lowered his voice. After a few months I heard she had moved to the countryside. Where in the countryside? I'm not sure, sir, but I heard it was a small town near Hartford. Jennifer took note of everything. George, do you remember her last name? I think it was Wilson, Catherine Wilson, said the gardener, but I'm not certain. Richard and Emily exchanged looks. Wilson was exactly the last name Richard used. George, said Richard hesitantly, are you sure I am William Parker? The gardener laughed. Sir, I've worked for you for 20 years. I know every gesture of yours, every way you speak. He stepped closer. You always rub your chin when you're deep in thought, just like you're doing now. Richard lowered his hand, surprised. I really was rubbing my chin without realizing it. And you've always preferred coffee without sugar, read with glasses even when you didn't really need to, and have a habit of arranging things in alphabetical order. Emily smiled. It's true, Dad. You've always been very organized. Richard looked around the room and noticed that the books on the shelf were, in fact, arranged in alphabetical order. It was exactly how he would have organized them. George, said Jennifer, could you give a statement confirming Mr. Williams' identity? Of course, Miss. No problem at all. George turned to Richard. Sir, are you all right? You seem worried. I'm confused, George. I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Mr. William, after the accident, it's normal to be confused. But the important thing is that you're alive and back home. The gardener smiled. And Miss Emily is here too. That was always what you wanted most. What I wanted most? For her to come back home. You always said that the fight between you was the biggest mistake of your life. Emily was moved by the gardener's words. George, did my father really miss me? Every day, miss. Every single day. George nodded. He kept all the newspapers that talked about the school where you worked. He knew all your professional successes by heart. Dad, you really did that? Asked Emily, with tears in her eyes. Richard felt a strange emotion growing in his chest. Even without remembering, he felt those words were true. George, thank you for all the information, said Jennifer. You can go back to work. We'll talk more about the statement later. Of course, miss. George headed to the door but stopped. Mr. William, may I ask a question? Of course. Are you going to play the piano tonight? I really missed those songs. Richard hesitated. He didn't know how to play the piano. Maybe, George, maybe. I would be very happy, sir. The gardener left, closing the door behind him. Emily approached Richard. Dad, do you want to try playing something? Maybe it will help you remember. I don't know how to play the piano, Emily. But George said you played every night, and there's a piano in the music room. She took his hand. Shall we try? What if I can't? Then you can't. But what if you can? Emily smiled. It might be the key to recovering your memories. Jennifer supported the idea. Mr. Parker, it's worth a try. The music can awaken deep memories. Richard took a deep breath. Why not try? If he really was William Parker, maybe he could play. And if he couldn't, at least he would know he wasn't him. All right, let's go to the music room. They went down to the first floor and Emily led him to a room he hadn't noticed before during his cleaning work. The room had wood-paneled walls and shelves full of sheet music. In the center, a black grand piano shone under the chandelier light. "This was always your favorite place in the house," said Emily, opening the piano lid. Richard approached the instrument with reverence. There was something familiar about that piano, as if he had been there before. "Sit down," suggested Jennifer. He sat on the padded bench and looked at the black and white keys. He had no idea how to start. "Try playing something simple," said Emily. "Let your fingers move naturally." Richard placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost without thinking, his fingers began to move. The first chords of a sad and beautiful melody echoed through the room. Richard was startled by the sound, but kept playing. It was as if his hands knew exactly where to go. "Dad," whispered Emily, with tears in her eyes, "it's Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. It was your favorite piece." Richard kept playing, surprised at himself. The music flowed naturally, as if he had played that piece thousands of times. When he finished, he stared at his own hands in disbelief. "How did I manage to do that?" he asked. "Because you are William Parker," said Jennifer. "Muscle memory isn't easily lost." "Dad, you're remembering," said Emily, moved. But Richard shook his head. "I'm not remembering anything. I just knew how to play." He rose from the bench. "It's as if my body knew that music, but my mind didn't." "It's normal, Mr. Parker. Memories can return gradually," explained Jennifer. "Play another song, Dad. Please." Richard sat down again and tried to play another piece. This time his fingers found an even sadder melody, a song he had never consciously heard but seemed to know deeply. "This is Chopin's Ballade No. 1, said Emily softly. "You always played it when you missed someone." "Missed who?" "I don't know, you never told me." Emily sat beside him on the bench. "But I always sensed there was someone special in your life that you lost." Richard stopped playing. "Catherine?" "Probably." Emily gently touched the keys. "Dad, you may not remember with your mind, but your heart remembers. That has to count for something." Jennifer approached the piano. "Mr. Parker, the fact that you can play is powerful evidence of your identity. No imposter could reproduce years of musical practice. But what if—" Richard hesitated. "What if I really am William Parker, but I never remember being Emily's father? What if I never managed to love her as a father should?" Emily took his hand. "Dad, you don't need to remember the past to build a future with me." She smiled through her tears. "We can start from scratch. We can create new moments together. What if I never feel like your real father? Then you'll feel like my friend, or my protector, or my piano teacher." Emily laughed. "The title doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here." Richard felt a strange emotion growing in his chest. He looked at that young woman who called him father and felt a genuine need to care for her. "Emily," he said finally, "I may not be the father you remember. I may never recover those memories. But I promise I will try to be the best I can for you. That's all I want, Dad." Jennifer smiled, watching the interaction between the two. "Well, now that we have solid evidence of Mr. Parker's identity, I need to organize the documentation for the hearing." She checked her watch. "And I'll start the investigation into Catherine Wilson." "Jennifer," said Richard, "is there any chance my cousins will question my mental capacity because of the memory loss?" The lawyer hesitated. "It's a possibility. They may claim you are not mentally fit to manage the inheritance." She took a deep breath. "That's why it's important to demonstrate that your abilities are intact." "How so?" "Rational decision-making, knowledge about your businesses, ability to recognize people and places," explained Jennifer. "The fact that you can play the piano helps a lot. It shows that your motor and cognitive skills are preserved." "What if they bring a doctor to evaluate me?" "Then we will also bring our own experts," said Jennifer determinedly. "We won't let them invalidate your identity because of amnesia." Emily rose from the piano bench. "Dad, do you want to see the rest of the house? Maybe seeing other rooms will help awaken more memories." "Good idea," agreed Jennifer. "The more familiar you are with the property, the better." They spent the next 2 hours touring the mansion. Richard saw elegantly decorated bedrooms, a study with an impressive library, a dining room that could seat 20 people, and a modern kitchen that looked like it came straight out of a magazine. In each room, Emily and George, who had joined the group, told stories about William Parker. They spoke of his preferences, his habits, his peculiarities. Gradually, Richard began to get a clearer picture of the man he was supposed to be. William was described as generous but reserved, intelligent but melancholy, successful but lonely. A man who loved music, books and gardens, but who seemed to carry a deep sadness. Mr. William always enjoyed reading in the garden on Sunday afternoons, George told them as they walked along the paths among the flowers. He would sit on that bench under the tree and spend hours with a book. Richard looked at the bench mentioned and felt a strange familiarity. He could almost see himself sitting there reading peacefully among the plants. What kind of books did he like? Poetry, mostly, and biographies of famous musicians, Emily replied. You had an impressive collection of books about classical composers. When they went back inside the house, Jennifer had received an important call. Mr. Parker, I have news about Catherine Wilson, she said, putting away her cell phone. Did you manage to find her? My investigator located records of a Catherine Wilson who moved to Hartford 24 years ago. Jennifer consulted her notes. She worked as an elementary school teacher and had a son. A son? Asked Emily. Yes, Michael Wilson Parker. Richard felt his heart stop. Parker, he has the last name, Parker. According to the records, yes, the father is listed as William Parker. Jennifer looked at him meaningfully. Mr. Parker, you have a 24-year-old son. Emily turned pale. You mean I have a brother? Apparently, yes. Jennifer continued reading. Michael Wilson. Parker lives in Hartford, works as an engineer and, she paused, is married and has a young daughter. I have a granddaughter? Asked Richard in disbelief. If we confirm that you are indeed William Parker, yes. Emily sat down heavily in an armchair. Father, why did you never tell me about Michael? Richard sat down beside her. Daughter, I don't remember any of this. He took her hand. Perhaps I had my reasons at the time. Maybe I wanted to protect both of you. Or maybe I was a coward. Is Catherine still alive? Asked Emily. Yes, replied Jennifer. She lives in a simple house on the outskirts of Hartford. She's been a widow for 3 years. Can we speak with her? I've already tried to make contact, but she refused to talk about William Parker. Jennifer put away the papers. She said that chapter of her life was closed a long time ago. And Michael? Does he know that William is his father? According to the records, yes. Catherine registered him with his father's name. Jennifer hesitated. But it seems they never had any contact. Richard stood up and walked to the window. He had a son he never knew and a granddaughter he never saw. How could he have abandoned a family like that? Father, Emily said gently, you were in a difficult situation back then. Perhaps Catherine decided to distance herself. Or maybe I was a coward who abandoned the woman I loved when she needed me most. We don't know what really happened, said Jennifer. But now we have a chance to find out, and more importantly, Michael could be a crucial witness to confirm your identity. How so? If he physically resembles you, if Catherine confirms that you are his father, we will have irrefutable evidence of who you are, the lawyer explained. And if they don't want to talk to me, then we will try other means. But I believe Michael will be curious to meet his father. Jennifer headed to the door. I'll try to contact him yet today. After the attorney's departure, Richard and Emily were alone in the living room. The weight of all the day's revelations was beginning to make itself felt. Father, said Emily, do you regret staying here? I don't know, Richard answered honestly. My life was simple before. I worked, came home, watched television. I had no great responsibilities or great problems. But you also had no great joys, observed Emily. True. He smiled slightly. And now I have a talented daughter, a son I never knew, and apparently a granddaughter, and a mansion and staff who depend on you and cousins who want your head. Richard laughed, despite everything. When you put it that way, it seems my simple life was much better. Father, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you feel anything when you look at me? Any paternal affection? Or am I just a stranger to you? Richard thought carefully before answering. When I look at you, I feel a need to protect you. I don't know if it's paternal instinct or just sympathy for a young woman in difficulties. He gently touched her face. But there's something about you that moves me. Perhaps it's the way you believe in me, even when I don't believe in myself. It's enough to start, said Emily, smiling. And you? What do you feel when you look at me? I see my father, not the father of my childhood, whom I idealized during these 5 years, but the man he could have been if he hadn't carried so much weight alone. Emily moved closer. I see someone good, honest, who's trying to do the right thing even without remembering what the right thing is. Thank you, daughter. For the first time, Richard used the word daughter naturally, without hesitation. Emily noticed and her eyes filled with tears. You said daughter. I did. Richard smiled. I think I'm starting to get used to the idea. They had dinner together that night, served by a cook who apparently worked part-time at the house. The woman, Mrs. Miller, recognized Richard immediately and cried with emotion upon seeing him. Mr. William, how good that you're back, she said, drying her tears on her apron. I was so worried when I heard about the accident. Mrs. Miller, said Emily, my father is having some memory problems. He may not remember everything right away. Of course, miss. It's normal after a trauma. Mrs. Miller approached Richard. Sir, may I prepare your favorite food tomorrow? Perhaps it will help you remember. What is my favorite food? Asked Richard, curious. My grandmother's Portuguese-style codfish. You always said it was better than any restaurants. Richard's mouth watered just imagining it. He had always loved codfish. That would be wonderful, Mrs. Miller, thank you. After dinner, Emily suggested they look at some old photo albums. Perhaps the images would help awaken memories. They settled in the library, surrounded by old books and family photographs. Emily opened the first album, which showed William Parker through the years. This is from when you bought the house 20 years ago, she said, showing a photo of the man in front of the mansion. Richard studied the image. The man in the photo looked happy, proud of his new property. There was an energy in him that Richard didn't feel in himself. And this is from a party you threw to celebrate a successful business deal, continued Emily, turning the page. The photo showed dozens of elegantly dressed people in the mansion's garden. William was in the center, smiling and toasting with a glass of champagne. Did I throw many parties? Asked Richard. A few, mostly for business. But you always seemed uncomfortable with large crowds. You preferred small gatherings. They continued flipping through the album. There were photos of trips of family gatherings of Emily as a child. In many of the images, William appeared smiling, but Richard noticed the smile didn't reach his eyes. I looked sad, he observed. You've always been melancholy. Even when things were going well, there was a sadness underneath. Emily turned more pages. Maybe because of Catherine. Maybe because you didn't have Michael around. Or maybe it was just my personality. Maybe. Emily reached a page showing photos of her from age 5 to 15. These are photos of us together. Richard saw the man in the photos interacting with a girl who gradually grew from picture to picture. There was genuine affection in the images, father-daughter moments that seemed authentic. Were we close? He asked. Very, especially after my mother died. Emily touched one of the photos. You used to take me to school, help with homework, come to my piano recitals. You played piano too. You taught me. Emily smiled. Remember I said I wanted to study music. It's because I grew up listening to you play. And why did we fight? Emily closed the album and sighed. Because I wanted to follow my own path and you wanted me to take over the family business. She looked at him. You said I was your only heir and had responsibilities. And you? I said I didn't ask to be born rich and that I wanted to earn my own success. Emily laughed without humor. We were both too proud to give in. And now? Now I understand you just wanted to protect me. And I hope you understand I just wanted to be free to choose. Richard closed the last album and leaned back in the armchair. Daughter, if I really am your father, I promise this time I will support your dreams. And I promise this time I will listen to your advice, said Emily. We can find a middle ground. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the emotional intensity of the day. Dad, can I ask you something about your life as Richard? Of course. Were you happy? Richard thought carefully. I wasn't unhappy. It was neutral. Every day was the same as the last. I worked, came home, watched television, slept. I had no great joys, but also no great sorrows. And now I'm confused, scared, but also, he hesitated, I also feel more alive than I have in years. Even with all the problems? Maybe because of the problems. Richard smiled. It's like I've woken up from a long and dreamless sleep. Emily stood up and kissed his forehead. Good night, Dad. Tomorrow will be a better day. Good night, daughter. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard went up to the room that was supposedly his and lay down on the king-size bed. The mattress was too comfortable, the sheets were too soft. Everything was too much compared to what he was used to. He looked at the ornate ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. In less than 12 hours, he had gone from being a simple janitor to becoming a wealthy businessman with a complicated family and troublesome cousins. Was he really William Parker? The evidence seemed convincing. The physical resemblance, the birthmark, the musical ability, the recognition from people who had known him for years. But why couldn't he remember anything? And if he really was William, what kind of man had he been? People spoke of him with affection, but they also mentioned his constant sadness. Had he abandoned Catherine and Michael? Why? Richard got up and walked to the window. The garden was lit by soft lights, creating an almost magical atmosphere. He could see the small house in the back where George lived, a light still on in the window. He decided to go down to get a glass of water. The house was silent, only the ticking of an antique clock echoing through the halls. In the kitchen, he found Emily sitting at the table, drinking tea. Can't sleep either, he asked. My mind won't stop. Emily gestured for him to sit. Would you like some tea? Please. She poured a steaming cup and slid it to him. Dad, can I confess something? Of course. I'm afraid that if you recover your memories, you'll go back to being the rigid and distant man I remember. Emily stirred her tea nervously. The man you are now, even confused, seems more human. How so? The father I remembered was very controlled. He always knew what to do, always had the right answers. But he was also hard to get close to. She looked into his eyes. You're more vulnerable now, more open. Perhaps the memory loss has freed me from some barriers I had built. Perhaps, Emily smiled. Whatever the case, I like who you are now. And if the memories come back, then we hope you keep the best of both, the wisdom of the past and the openness of the present. They drank tea in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Dad, are you nervous about Michael? Very, admitted Richard. How do I explain to an adult son that I don't remember him? How do I justify being away for so long? Maybe you don't need to justify. Maybe you just need to start from where we are now. What if he hates me? Then you'll have to work through it together. Emily touched his hand. But Dad, remember that he carries your last name. Catherine registered him as Parker. That means something. It means she wanted him to know who his father was. Exactly. And if she wanted him to know, maybe it wasn't you who abandoned them. Maybe it was her who chose to leave. Richard hadn't considered that possibility. Why would she do that? We don't know, but tomorrow we might find out. Emily finished her tea. Jennifer said she'll try to talk to Michael. What if he doesn't want to meet me? Then at least we will have tried. Emily stood up. Dad, you can't blame yourself for things you don't remember doing, nor for decisions you may not have made. It's hard not to feel responsible. I know, but you can only control what you do from here on out. They said goodnight again, and each went to their room. This time, Richard managed to sleep, although he dreamed of a dark-haired woman calling his name, a child growing up without knowing him, and sad music echoing through empty halls. The next morning, Richard woke to the sound of raised voices coming from downstairs. He dressed quickly and went down to investigate. In the living room, he found Emily arguing with two men in suits. One was older, with greying hair and a stern expression. The other was younger, with features that vaguely resembled William Parker. "Emily, you can't be here," said the older man. "There's a court order." "And you can't stop me from visiting my father," retorted Emily. "Your father is dead, girl. Accept it once and for all." "Robert, stop it," said the younger man. "Emily, where is this man you claim is our uncle?" It was then that the two men noticed Richard standing on the stairs. The silence was absolute for a few seconds. Robert, the older one, visibly paled. My God," he murmured. Daniel, the younger one, climbed a few steps to look at Richard more closely. "The resemblance is striking," he said, circling Richard as if examining a work of art. "But resemblance proves nothing." "Hello," Richard said simply. "Uncle William?" asked Daniel hesitantly. "Is it really you?" "Everyone tells me it is," replied Richard, coming down the rest of the stairs. Robert recovered from the initial shock and took on an aggressive stance. "It doesn't matter who you are. The process to declare presumption of death has already begun. William Parker is officially dead." "But he's right here in front of us," protested Emily. "There stands a man who may or may not be William Parker." Robert approached Richard. "Do you remember me?" "No." "Do you remember Daniel?" "No." "Do you remember lending me $50,000 2 years ago?" Richard hesitated. He didn't remember, but he also didn't want to lie. "I don't remember that." "How convenient," said Robert sarcastically. "A man who remembers nothing about his life but shows up right when there's an inheritance at stake." "Robert," intervened Daniel, "he might truly be ill. Memory loss happens. Or he might be faking." Robert circled Richard again. "Let's say you really are our uncle. You remember nothing about your businesses, your responsibilities, your debts. How can you manage a fortune under these conditions?" "I—" began Richard. "Exactly. You can't." Robert smiled coldly. "Which means you'll need legal guardians to manage your inheritance, and we, as the only living relatives, will be appointed your guardians." Emily stepped between Robert and Richard. "He has a daughter. I'm family too." "You're an inexperienced young woman who left the family 5 years ago," said Robert. "We are adult businessmen with experience in business." "You're failed businessmen who are bankrupt," retorted Emily. Daniel intervened before the argument escalated further. "Everyone, let's take it easy," he addressed Richard. "Uncle, do you mind if I ask a few questions? To clarify the situation?" "Go ahead. What was the name of the company you ran?" Richard looked at Emily, who shook her head almost imperceptibly, indicating he shouldn't reveal that he didn't know. "I'm having trouble remembering specific details," he said carefully. "What was your dog's name when you were a child?" "I don't remember." "Where did you and my father used to go fishing when we were kids?" "I don't remember." Robert laughed with satisfaction. "See? He knows nothing. He's an imposter." "Or he is truly our uncle with severe amnesia," said Daniel thoughtfully. "Daniel, don't be naive." Robert turned to Richard. "Where have you been this past year?" Richard decided to be honest. "Working as a janitor for a cleaning company. I lived in a small apartment in Queens." "Working as a janitor?" Robert guffawed. "William Parker, one of the most successful businessmen in New York City, working as a janitor. What a convenient memory loss." "Robert, stop," said Daniel. "If he really is our uncle, he's sick. He needs help, not mockery. And if he isn't, then we'll find out through the proper medical and legal examinations." At that moment, Jennifer arrived, entering the room like a whirlwind. "Mr. Parker, we have important news about Michael." She stopped upon seeing Robert and Daniel. "Oh, hello, gentlemen." "Jennifer," said Robert with false courtesy, "I hope you're not aiding this farce." I am representing my client, William Parker, as I always have, the lawyer replied firmly. Your client is dead. My client is right here. Jennifer opened her briefcase, and I've just received information that may clarify many questions. What information? Asked Daniel. Michael Wilson Parker has agreed to take a DNA test, announced Jennifer. If Mr. Johnson is truly William Parker, the paternity test with Michael will be positive. Robert looked visibly uncomfortable. That proves nothing. William could have had an illegitimate child. It proves this man is Michael's father. And if Michael is the son of William Parker, then this man is William Parker. Jennifer explained logically. Unless Michael isn't really William's son, Robert said desperately, then the test will show that too. Jennifer smiled. Michael is coming to New York City tomorrow. He wants to meet his father. Richard felt his stomach turn. He wants to meet me. Yes, Mr. Parker. Apparently, he's always wondered about his father and wants to clarify the situation. Jennifer put away the papers. He'll be coming with Catherine, his mother. Catherine is coming too? Asked Emily. Yes. She finally agreed to talk about the past. Robert and Daniel exchanged worried glances. Jennifer, said Robert, regardless of the test results, the legal process to declare William's death continues, and if this man really is him, there's still the matter of mental capacity. We've already anticipated that, replied Jennifer. I've arranged a full medical evaluation with a renowned neurologist. Mr. Parker will undergo all necessary tests to verify his mental capacity, and if he's deemed incompetent, then we'll discuss the appropriate legal options, but it won't be you who decides that unilaterally. Daniel approached Richard once more. Uncle, can I ask a personal question? Go ahead. Do you really not remember anything about our family? Richard looked at the young man who claimed to be his nephew. There was something sincere in his eyes that touched him. I don't remember, Daniel, but that doesn't mean I don't want to learn about you all. And what about your business? Don't you remember anything? Nothing. Richard sighed. I know this must be frustrating for you. Imagine how frustrating it is for me. Daniel nodded with understanding. It must be terrible to live with this uncertainty. Yes, agreed Richard. But I'm trying to rebuild my life with Emily's and Jennifer's help. Robert snorted impatiently. Rebuild? You can't rebuild a life that might not even be yours. Robert, please, said Daniel. Can we at least give the man the benefit of the doubt until we know for sure? The benefit of the doubt could cost a fortune, Daniel. Literally. And if he really is our uncle, then we'd be treating a sick man like a criminal. Robert seemed to consider his brother's words. Fine, he said finally. We'll wait for the test results, but if there's any evidence of fraud, we'll sue everyone involved. That's fair, said Jennifer, and if the tests confirm this is indeed William Parker, I hope you'll respect his rights. As long as he's mentally capable of exercising those rights, said Robert. After the cousins left, Richard sat down heavily in an armchair. Daughter, I think I've bitten off more than I can chew. What do you mean? Even if I really am William Parker, how will I manage a fortune without remembering anything about business? Robert is right about that. Emily sat beside him. Father, you don't have to manage everything alone. You can hire managers, consultants. Jennifer can help. And what if I make wrong decisions? What if I destroy everything William built? Then we'll rebuild, said Emily firmly. Father, you're smart, I can see that. And you have good character. That's more important than technical knowledge. Jennifer approached them. Mr. Parker, may I suggest a temporary solution? Of course. We can create a board of directors with trusted people. You maintain final authority, but have specialized advisors for all major decisions. Would that be legal? Completely. Many business owners work this way, explained the lawyer. And as you recover memories or learn about the business, you can gradually take on more responsibilities. Who would be on this board? Me, as the lawyer. Emily, as the heir. And we could hire a professional administrator who already knows William's companies. Would that give me legal credibility? Yes, it would show you're taking responsible measures to protect the estate, even with the memory limitations. Richard considered the proposal. And my cousins? They wouldn't be able to argue that you're irresponsible if you're surrounded by competent professionals, said Jennifer. Dad, said Emily, you don't need to decide everything today. Michael is coming tomorrow. Let's see what we find out with him and Catherine before making big decisions. You're right. Richard took a deep breath. One thing at a time. Mr. Parker, said Jennifer, there's one more thing I need to tell you about Michael. What is it? He's an engineer, but also a musician. He plays piano professionally on weekends. Richard was surprised. Did he inherit the musical talent? Apparently yes, and according to Catherine, he never had formal lessons. He taught himself. Like I did? Murmured Richard. Mr. Parker, your musical talent is clearly hereditary. Michael could be further evidence of your identity, explained Jennifer. And my granddaughter? Sophie. She's 3 years old and apparently also shows interest in music. Richard smiled for the first time in hours. A musical family. Yes, and tomorrow you'll meet part of that family. The rest of the day passed in preparations for Michael and Catherine's arrival. Emily insisted that Richard try to play more piano to impress his possible son and to exercise his muscle memory. While practicing a Mozart sonata, Richard wondered what it would be like to meet an adult son. Michael was 24 years old, the same age as Emily. He must have his own opinions, his own dreams and frustrations. Would Michael blame him for growing up without a father? Had Catherine told bad stories about William? Or had she kept good memories? Dad, said Emily, interrupting his thoughts, are you nervous? Very, admitted Richard, stopping playing. What if he hates me? What if he doesn't hate you? Emily sat next to him on the piano bench. Dad, you're always imagining the worst possible scenario. It's hard not to imagine. I abandoned a family, even if I don't remember why. Maybe you didn't abandon them. Maybe it was the circumstances. Emily touched a few keys softly. People separate for various reasons. There isn't always a villain in the story. I hope you're right. Dad, want to know what I think? Of course. I think you were a very young man when you got involved with Catherine. Maybe you got scared by the responsibility of having a child. Maybe you didn't know how to balance your relationship with her and your family obligations with me and the businesses. And Catherine, maybe she realized you were divided and decided to spare both of you from a difficult situation. Emily paused. Maybe she was noble by walking away. Or maybe I was cowardly for letting her go. Or maybe both of you did the best you could in a complicated situation. Richard played a few melancholic chords. Daughter, thank you for always trying to see the best in me. I'm just being realistic, Dad. People make mistakes, but that doesn't make them bad people. That night, Richard barely managed to sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, imagining what Michael would be like. Would he be tall like him? Would he have the same eyes, the same hands, the same temperament? And Catherine? How would she be after all these years? Would she still be the beautiful woman from George's descriptions? Would she be bitter? Would she be happy to see him again, or resentful for having been abandoned? At 6 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep and went down to the kitchen. To his surprise, he found Emily already awake, drinking coffee. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Not a minute. Richard poured himself some coffee. And you? I stayed up all night thinking about what it will be like to have a brother. Are you nervous too? Very. Emily smiled. I always wanted to have siblings. Now I have a brother, plus a sister-in-law and a niece. What if he doesn't like you? Then I'll just have to win him over, said Emily determinedly. I won't miss this chance to have a bigger family. They drank their coffee in silence, each lost in their own anxious thoughts. At 9 o'clock, Jennifer arrived with more information. Mr. Parker, Michael and Catherine arrived in the city last night. They're staying at a nearby hotel, she said, putting away her coat. They'll come here at 2 in the afternoon. How are they? Asked Emily. Nervous but curious, Michael especially seems eager to meet his father. Jennifer sat down. Catherine is more cautious. She said she wants to be sure it's really William before talking about the past. That's understandable, said Richard. It was probably very painful for her. Mr. Parker, I've prepared some questions that might help clarify the situation. Things only William would know about his relationship with Catherine. Jennifer opened her briefcase. If you answer correctly, it will be strong evidence of your identity. What if I don't know the answers? Then Catherine may decide for herself whether she believes you are William with amnesia or someone else. The hours until Michael and Catherine's arrival passed slowly. Richard tried to eat lunch but couldn't manage much. Emily practiced piano to calm herself. Jennifer reviewed documents and prepared legal questions. At 2 o'clock sharp, they heard a car arriving. Richard felt his heart race. "They're here," said Emily, looking out the window. Richard stood up, but his legs felt weak. This was the moment of truth. In just a few minutes, he would know if he really had a son, and if he could recover at least a part of his past. "Father," said Emily, holding his hand, "no matter what happens, I'm here with you." "Thank you, daughter." The doorbell rang. Jennifer went to answer it. Richard and Emily stayed in the living room, waiting. "Mr. Parker," called Jennifer. "They're here." Richard took a deep breath and walked to the entrance hall. There stood two people he had never seen before, but who supposedly were part of his life. Michael really did look like him. He had the same height, the same eye color, even the same way of standing. He seemed tense but curious. Catherine was a woman in her early 40s, still beautiful, but with eyes that showed she had lived through a lot. When she saw Richard, her expression went through several emotions: surprise, recognition, pain, and something that might have been relief. "William?" she whispered. "Is it really you?" Richard didn't know what to say. He looked at Michael, who was watching him intently. "Father?" said Michael tentatively. The word father hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. That tall, handsome young man was his son. Even without memories, he felt an immediate connection. "Michael," he said, his voice faltering. "My son." Michael approached slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. "You really don't remember anything?" "I don't. But—" Richard hesitated. "But looking at you, I know you're my son." "How do you know?" "Because you look just like I did at that age." Richard smiled through his tears. "And because I feel it right here." He touched his chest. Michael was also emotional. "I always wondered what you'd be like. My mother always spoke well of you. But I never understood why we weren't together." "Catherine," said Richard, turning to her, "can you explain what happened?" Catherine dried her eyes before answering. "William, first I need to be sure it's really you." She approached and gently touched his face. "You have a small scar behind your left ear, from a schoolyard fight when you were a boy." Richard automatically touched the mentioned spot. The scar was there. "And you have a wine stain on your chest, shaped like a star." Richard opened his shirt. The mark was exactly where Catherine had described. "My God," she whispered. "It really is you. But you look so different." "Different how?" "More human, less distant." Catherine looked into his eyes. "The William I knew was wonderful, but he always seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders." "Catherine, please tell me what happened between us." She looked around, noticing Emily and Jennifer listening attentively. "Can we talk in private first?" "Of course." Richard led her to the library, leaving Michael with Emily in the living room. In the library, Catherine sat in an armchair and Richard in the other, waiting for her to tell the story that could explain so many things. "William, we met at a business conference 25 years ago," began Catherine. "I was a secretary for one of the speakers. You were a young entrepreneur on the rise, and we fell in love?" "Madly." Catherine smiled sadly. "They were the 6 happiest months of my life. You were thoughtful, romantic. You made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. What happened? You found out I was pregnant." Catherine lowered her eyes. "And you also found out that your father had left huge debts that you would have to pay. Suddenly you had family responsibilities with me and with Michael, but also enormous financial pressures. And then? You were torn. You wanted to do right by me, but you also couldn't abandon Emily, who was still little." Catherine wiped away a tear. "And there was the business. which needed all your attention to survive the crisis. So I chose the business and Emily and abandoned you." "No," Catherine stood up quickly. "It wasn't like that. You tried to balance everything. You came to see me whenever you could, helped financially, promised that soon we could be together officially. But I saw how much you were suffering. I saw that you were destroying yourself trying to be everything to everyone." Catherine walked to the window. "And I saw that Emily was feeling your absence. She needed her father present. So you decided to step away. I said I needed some time to think. I moved to Hartford where I had a cousin." Catherine turned to him. "I said that when you resolved your financial and family issues, we could talk about the future, and I never resolved them. You tried to find me a few times. You called, sent letters, even went to Hartford to see me twice." Catherine sat back down. "But you were always stressed, always had other problems to solve. And you got tired of waiting." "I fell in love with another man," admitted Catherine. "A teacher at the school where Michael studied. He was a widower, had children the same age as Michael. He offered the stability that you couldn't offer at the time." Richard felt a pang of jealousy, even though he didn't remember her. "And you got married?" "Yes." He officially adopted Michael but kept the last name Parker as a middle name. Catherine looked at him. "Michael always knew you were his biological father. I always respected that. Why did you never look for me when he was older?" "Because I said you had your reasons for staying away, that maybe it was better to leave things as they were." Catherine sighed. "But I always knew that one day this conversation would happen." "And the husband? What did he think about this?" "He died 3 years ago. A good man, he was a wonderful father to Michael." Catherine wiped her eyes. "In his last moments, he told Michael to look for you. He said every man has the right to know his biological father. So Michael looked for me because of his stepfather's advice. Yes, and because he was always curious, especially after he became a father." Catherine smiled. "Sophie awakens all his paternal instincts. It made him wonder what it would have been like if he had grown up with you. Richard absorbed all the information. The story made sense and explained why there were no clear villains in the situation. Catherine, do you forgive me for not fighting harder for you? William, we were young in an impossible situation. You did what you thought was best at the time." She touched his hand. "And look how Michael grew up. He's a good, intelligent man who built a beautiful family. Perhaps things happened exactly as they were meant to. But I missed so many important moments." "You did. But you can make up for lost time now if you want." "Of course I want to," said Richard without hesitation. "Michael is my son. I want to get to know him, meet my granddaughter, have a relationship with them." "And what about me?" asked Catherine timidly. Richard studied her. She was still beautiful, there was still chemistry between them, but she had become a stranger to him. "Catherine, I can't pretend to feel something I don't. My memory doesn't come back by willpower." He took her hands. "But I would like to get to know you again, as friends, as Michael's parents. No pressure, no expectations beyond a good relationship." "That's all I can ask for," smiled Catherine. They returned to the living room, where they found Michael and Emily talking animatedly. "Dad," said Emily, "Michael told me he plays piano, and that Sophie is already showing interest in music. She gets hypnotized when I play any classical music," said Michael, smiling. "My wife jokes that she'll be a musician like her grandfather." "Michael," said Richard, "I would very much like to meet my granddaughter. She's with my wife at the hotel. We can pick them up if you want." "I really want to." Jennifer, who had been discreetly observing everything, approached. "Mr. Parker, we still need to resolve the legal matter of the DNA tests." "Of course," said Michael. "I brought all the necessary documents. We can do the test this afternoon." "Michael," asked Richard, "do you believe I am your father?" "Yes," replied Michael without hesitation. "I may not have conscious memories of you, since I was a baby when my mother moved, but there's something about you that feels familiar, and physically we look very alike. And do you want to have a relationship with me?" "Very much." Michael smiled. I always wondered what it would be like to have a father. I want Sophie to meet her biological grandfather, and I want to learn about our family. Emily approached Michael. And I want to meet my niece, she said excitedly. I never thought I'd have such a big family. Emily, can I ask you a question? Said Michael. Of course. Do you remember our father ever talking about me when we were children? Emily thought carefully. I remember he would sometimes get thoughtful and sad for no apparent reason. Now it makes sense. She looked at Richard. You always carried the weight of having kept us apart. Perhaps that's why I was melancholic, said Richard. The guilt of not being able to keep the family together. Dad, said Michael, you don't need to carry that guilt. I grew up with love, had a wonderful stepfather. I'm happy in life. He stepped closer. Now we can focus on the present and the future. Michael is right, agreed Catherine. The past is gone, let's build new memories. Jennifer arranged for the DNA test to be done that same afternoon. While they waited for the results, which would take a few days, Michael went to pick up his wife and daughter at the hotel. When they returned, Richard was moved to see little Sophie. She was a beautiful 3-year-old girl with curly hair and bright eyes. She hid behind her mother when she saw Richard, but gradually came closer. Sophie, this is your grandfather, said Michael softly. Grandpa? Asked the little girl, looking at Richard with curiosity. Yes, my love, Grandpa William. Sophie approached Richard, who knelt down to be at her level. Hello, Sophie, he said gently. Do you play piano? Asked the little girl. I do. Do you like music? Very much. Daddy plays for me every night. How about we play together? Suggested Richard. Sophie nodded excitedly, and soon the whole family was in the music room. Richard played simple melodies, while Sophie clapped her hands and tried to sing along. Michael accompanied with harmonies, and Emily added her own part. Catherine, watching from afar, cried at seeing the scene she had always dreamed of, a musical family gathered together, sharing joy through music. Monica, Catherine said to Michael's wife, thank you for letting Sophie get to know her grandfather. Catherine, family is important, replied Monica, a sweet woman of 30. Michael always wondered about his father. Now Sophie can know this part of the family history. That evening everyone dined together at the large table in the mansion. For the first time since he had awakened as William Parker, Richard felt truly at home. He was surrounded by people who loved him, people who wanted to be there with him. Father, said Emily, you seem happier tonight. I am, admitted Richard. I finally feel like I have a real family. Father, said Michael, may I make a suggestion? Of course. What if Monica and I moved to New York City? That way Sophie could grow up near her grandparents and aunt. You would do that? Asked Richard, surprised. My work allows me to work from home most of the time, and Monica is a teacher. She can get a job at any school, explained Michael. That would be wonderful, said Emily. Sophie could study music here at home. And I could teach her piano, added Richard. And other children too, suggested Catherine. Remember the conservatory project? Catherine, said Jennifer, Mr. Parker mentioned that project yesterday. Apparently William always wanted to create a music school for underprivileged children. It was one of the dreams you shared, Catherine said to Richard. You always talked about using part of the mansion to teach music. We can make it happen now, said Emily excitedly. We have the space, we have the resources, and now we have teachers. Michael plays piano. I teach music theory. Catherine has experience in education, listed Emily. It would be perfect. Richard looked around the table, seeing the excited faces of his family. You know what, he said. Even without memories of the past, this project feels right. It feels like something I would want to do. Then we'll do it, said Michael determinedly. It will be a Parker family project. Parker family, repeated Richard, savoring the words. I like the sound of that. After dinner, Michael showed Richard photos of his life. There were pictures from childhood, from his engineering graduation, from his wedding to Monica, from Sophie's birth. These were moments Richard had missed, but which he could now know through stories. Michael, asked Richard, do you resent me for not being present in these moments? Initially, yes, admitted Michael. When I was a teenager, I was angry that you weren't around. But with time, I understood that life is complicated and that people can't always be where they want to be. And now I'm grateful for this second chance. Not everyone gets the opportunity to know their father as an adult. Michael smiled. And Sophie will have memories of her grandfather, which is more than I had. I'll make up for lost time, promised Richard. You don't need to make up for anything. You just need to be present from now on. The next morning, Richard woke up feeling different. For the first time since his new life had begun, he woke up with positive expectations for the day. He had a family that loved him, projects to accomplish, a future to build. During breakfast, Jennifer arrived with more news. Mr. Parker, Robert and Daniel want an urgent meeting, she said, looking worried. About what? They found out about Michael and Catherine. They're claiming that you fabricated evidence to confirm their identity. What do you mean? Asked Michael. They hired a private investigator who discovered your visit. Now they're saying you might have been paid to pretend to be William's family. That's ridiculous, exclaimed Emily. It is ridiculous, but it's a serious accusation, explained Jennifer. They're threatening to file a fraud lawsuit. Jennifer, said Richard, when will we have the DNA test results? In 3 days, but they don't want to wait. What exactly do they want? A meeting this afternoon with everyone involved present. They want to question Michael and Catherine in person. Michael stood up from the table. I'm ready to answer any question. I have nothing to hide. Neither do I, added Catherine. I brought all of Michael's documents, old photos, everything that can prove our story. Mr. Parker, said Jennifer, they also brought a lawyer who specializes in fraud. It will be a tense meeting. It doesn't matter, said Richard determinedly. We won't be intimidated. If they want the truth, they'll get the truth. Father, said Emily, are you sure you want to face this now? It could be very stressful. Daughter, the time has come to stop running from confrontations. Richard stood up. Even if I never recover my memories as William Parker, I know who I am now, and I know that you are my family. And we're with you, said Michael, no matter what they try to do. The meeting was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon at the mansion. When Robert and Daniel arrived, they brought with them a thin lawyer with glasses and a stern expression, plus a man who introduced himself as a private investigator. William, said Robert coldly, or whoever you are, the time has come to clarify this situation once and for all. I'm ready, replied Richard calmly. Robert's lawyer, Mr. Williams, took control of the meeting. Mr. Richard, is that your real name? He began. Yes. Richard Johnson. And you admit that 3 days ago you worked as a janitor, and today you claim to be the owner of this mansion. I admit there is confusion about my identity, yes. Confusion is an interesting word. Mr. Williams turned to Michael. And you are Michael Wilson Parker? Yes. When did you meet this man? Yesterday was the first time I saw him in person. In person? So you had previous contact? Michael hesitated. No, I only knew of his existence through my mother. I see. Mr. Williams took notes. And you, Mrs. Catherine, when was the last time you saw William Parker before yesterday? Over 20 years ago, replied Catherine. 20 years is a long time. How can you be sure this man is the same person? By the physical characteristics I described yesterday. Birthmarks, scars, details that only William would know. Or that someone with access to William's medical records could know. Jennifer intervened. Mr. Williams, are you implying there was illegal access to medical records? I'm investigating all possibilities of fraud. The private investigator spoke for the first time. We found some inconsistencies in the stories, he said, consulting a tablet. Catherine Wilson moved to Hartford 24 years ago as claimed, but according to local city records, she never mentioned William Parker as Michael's father until last year. What do you mean? Asked Richard. In Michael's school and medical records in Hartford, the father field was always left blank or listed the adoptive stepfather, explained the investigator. The name William Parker only appeared when Catherine requested an updated birth certificate last year. Catherine paled. I didn't want to complicate Michael's life with family matters. He had a present father, his stepfather. I saw no need to mention William in official documents. How convenient, said Robert with sarcasm. Precisely in the year William disappeared, you decide to document the paternity. That wasn't why, protested Catherine. It was because Michael was getting married and wanted to regularize all his documents. Miss Jennifer, said Mr. Williams, can you prove this claim? I can check the records at the courthouse, replied Jennifer. Do that. The lawyer turned to Michael. Mr. Michael, can you prove you never had contact with William Parker? How can I prove the absence of something? Replied Michael, beginning to get irritated. Phones, emails, correspondence, bank transfers, any evidence of communication. There was never any communication. Again, how convenient. Mr. Williams closed his notebook. A son who never had contact with his father, but who appears precisely when there's an inheritance at stake. Doctor, said Richard, standing up, what is your theory? That I'm an imposter hired by Michael and Catherine to steal the inheritance. It's a possibility that needs to be investigated. And how do you explain the fact that I can play piano like William Parker? How do you explain my physical resemblance? How do you explain me knowing details about this house? Physical resemblances exist. Piano can be learned. And as for the details of the house, Mr. Williams smiled coldly. You worked here as a cleaner for 3 months. You had enough time to observe everything. Emily stood up, indignant. This is ridiculous. You're so desperate to steal the inheritance that you invent absurd theories. Miss Emily, said Robert, I understand you want to believe your father has returned, but you need to consider the possibility you're being deceived. Father doesn't deceive me. I recognize him. You haven't seen your father for 5 years. People change. Memories can be altered by desire. Daniel, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. Robert, I think we're exaggerating, he said. Even if there are inconsistencies, the physical resemblance is undeniable. Daniel, please, there are professional look-alikes, plastic surgeries. Now you're claiming I had plastic surgery to look like William Parker? Asked Richard, incredulous. We're investigating all possibilities. Michael stood up, clearly irritated. Mr. Robert, you're accusing my mother and me of fraud. That is a very serious accusation. And we're prepared to take it to court if necessary. Then do it, said Michael determinedly. I'll take any tests you want. DNA, medical exams, lie detection, whatever it takes to prove this man is my father. Catherine approached Robert. Mr. Robert, I can understand your suspicions. It's an unusual situation, she said calmly, but I can swear on my son's life that this man is William Parker. Your oath has no legal value, ma'am. Perhaps not. But it has moral value. Catherine looked directly into his eyes. And if I'm lying, what do I gain from it? Michael is an adult, independent. I don't need money or status. Why would I risk my reputation on a fraud? Mr. Williams consulted his notes. Mrs. Catherine, according to our investigator, you had financial difficulties after your husband's death. That could be a motivation. I had temporary difficulties like any widow, but they've already been resolved, replied Catherine firmly. And if William Parker promised financial help in exchange for your testimony. That's slander, shouted Michael. It's a legitimate question in a fraud investigation. Richard had heard enough. Mr. Williams, I'll make a proposal, he said, positioning himself at the center of the room. What proposal? Let's wait for the DNA test results. If it's positive, proving that Michael is my son, you stop these accusations and accept my identity. And if it's negative? If it's negative, I myself will abandon any claim to this inheritance and turn myself in to the authorities for fraud investigation. Mr. Williams and Robert whispered for a few moments. Very well, said Mr. Williams finally, but we want the test to be done at an independent lab, chosen by us. I agree, said Richard, and we want everyone involved to undergo medical exams to detect any evidence of plastic surgery or other procedures to alter appearance. I agree as well. Michael approached his supposed father. Father, are you sure about this? What if there's some mistake in the test? Michael, I am your father. The test will prove that. Richard smiled. I'm not afraid of the truth. And if you're not? What if we discover you're really not William Parker? Richard considered the question seriously. Then you'll have to deal with the fact that a stranger loved you as family for a few days, and I'll have to deal with the fact that I lost the most wonderful family I could have had. Richard's words moved everyone in the room, including Daniel, who discreetly wiped his eyes. Robert, however, maintained his skeptical posture. Very touching, but pretty words don't change scientific facts. You're right, agreed Richard. So let's await the scientific facts. The meeting ended with the agreement that everyone would wait for the test results. The lab chosen by Robert and Mr. Williams was renowned and trustworthy, which reassured Jennifer. After everyone left, the family gathered in the living room to process what had happened. "Father," said Emily, "do they really believe you're an imposter?" "Robert believes it, yes. Daniel seems to have doubts," replied Richard. "And I can understand their perspective. It is a very strange situation indeed." "But are you sure you're my father?" asked Michael. "Michael, I may not have memories, but I have convictions." Richard sat beside his son. "When I look at you, I have no doubt that we're related. It's stronger than logic or evidence." "Father," said Catherine, "what if for some reason the test comes back negative? Not that I believe it will, but what if there's some error? Then we'll face that situation when the time comes." Richard took Emily and Michael's hands. "But until then, let's live as a family. Let's enjoy every moment together." "And the conservatory project?" asked Emily. "Regardless of the test results, I still want to make it happen," said Richard determinedly. "Even if I'm not William Parker, I can still help children through music." Michael smiled. "Father, that's further proof that you are who you claim to be. That generosity, that concern for others. My mother always described William that way." Catherine nodded. William was always a man who thought of others' well-being before his own. The following 3 days were tense, but also special. Richard spent quality time with his new family, getting to know each of them deeply. Michael revealed himself to be an intelligent and sensitive man, with a sense of humor similar to Richard's. Monica was sweet and welcoming, treating Richard as if he were truly her father-in-law. And little Sophie brought pure joy to the house, filling the hallways with laughter and children's songs. Emily blossomed with the presence of her brother and niece. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the world. He had a large, loving family around him. Catherine spent days telling stories about her relationship with William, helping Richard better understand the man he had been. She described someone hard-working, talented, but who carried enormous pressures on his shoulders. William always held himself to very high standards, she told him one afternoon, as they watched Sophie playing in the garden. He felt he needed to be perfect for everyone around him. "And did that make me sad?" asked Richard. "Sometimes. You had a hard time relaxing, just enjoying the good moments." Catherine smiled. "But when you did relax, you were wonderful. Funny, caring, a dreamer. Like I am now." "Exactly like you are now," said Catherine. "Perhaps the memory loss removed the pressures that kept you tense." On the morning of the 3rd day, Jennifer arrived with the test results. "Mr. Parker," she said, with an expression that revealed nothing, "the results are in." The whole family gathered in the living room. The silence was absolute as Jennifer opened the envelope. "The paternity test," she paused, creating more tension, "is positive. Michael Wilson Parker is the biological son of William Parker, with 99.7% certainty." The relief was palpable. Michael hugged Richard tightly. Emily cried with joy. Catherine smiled through her tears. "Father," said Michael, "now it's official." "My son," replied Richard, moved. "My real son." Jennifer continued reading. "The medical exams found no evidence of plastic surgery or procedures to alter appearance. All physical characteristics are natural and consistent with William Parker's prior medical records." "And now?" asked Emily. "Now Robert and Daniel will have to accept Mr. Parker's identity and drop the proceedings to declare his death," explained Jennifer. "Will they accept it easily?" asked Richard. "Robert might try other legal avenues, but he no longer has any basis to question your identity." Jennifer put the documents away. "Mr. Parker, officially, you have regained your life." That afternoon, Robert and Daniel arrived for a final meeting. Robert looked defeated, but Daniel showed a more genuine acceptance of the results. "Uncle William," said Daniel, "I apologize for the accusations. I understand we were desperate, and that led us to take extreme measures." "I accept your apology, Daniel," replied Richard, "and I understand your situation." Robert remained silent for a few moments before speaking. "William, even if you truly are my uncle, the question of mental capacity still remains," he said coldly. "You remember nothing about the business, about the financial responsibilities." "Robert," said Jennifer, "we have already organized a board of directors to assist Mr. Parker." "Jennifer, let me answer," interrupted Richard. He addressed Robert directly. "Robert, you are right about my memory limitations, and because of that I want to make a proposal." "What proposal?" "I want to share the inheritance with you." The silence was complete. Everyone in the room was shocked. "Father, what are you saying?" asked Emily. "I'm saying this fortune is too large for one person, and you are family, even if we've had our problems." Richard looked at Robert and Daniel. "I don't want us to keep fighting over money." Robert was visibly surprised. You would do that?" "Under a few conditions," said Richard. "First, the management of the business stays with the board of directors we organized, but you can participate as paid consultants. Second, part of the estate will be allocated to the music conservatory we want to establish. Third, all long-time employees keep their jobs and benefits." Daniel stood up, moved. "Uncle, this is very generous." "It's fair," corrected Richard. "We're family, and family should help each other." Robert remained suspicious. "Why would you do this? What's the trick?" "There's no trick, Robert." Richard approached him. "I don't remember the man I was before, but I know the man I want to be now, and I want to be someone who unites the family instead of dividing it." Robert looked into his uncle's eyes, and for the first time Richard saw a vulnerability that wasn't there before. "Uncle, Robert hesitated. "I was afraid. Business wasn't going well. The debts were piling up. When you disappeared, I thought the inheritance would be our only salvation." "And it still can be," said Richard gently, "but by working together, not against each other." Daniel approached and touched his brother's shoulder. "Robert, accept the offer. It's more than we deserve after everything we've done." Robert took a deep breath, seeming to release a weight he'd carried for a long time. "I accept, Uncle William, and I apologize for having doubted." He extended his hand. "I promise I'll strive to be a better nephew." Richard shook his hand sincerely. "Robert, we all deserve a second chance, including me, who apparently wasn't the best uncle or father in the past." "Father," said Emily, "now that everything is settled, can we start planning the conservatory?" "Of course," Richard smiled. "Michael, would you be willing to coordinate the project?" "It would be an honor, Father," replied Michael. "Monica and I have already talked about moving permanently to New York City. Sophie would love growing up in a house full of music." Catherine approached Richard. "William, may I make a request?" "Of course, Catherine, anything." "I'd like to work at the conservatory, too, as the educational coordinator." She smiled timidly. "It would be a way to fulfill that old dream we had together." "Catherine, that would be perfect," said Richard sincerely. "But are you sure? Wouldn't it be strange working together after everything?" "I think we'd make great professional partners. And who knows?" She paused. "Who knows? Maybe we can even be friends again. I would like that very much." In the following months, Richard's life was completely transformed. The mansion, which was once a silent and melancholy place, filled with life and music. Michael and Monica moved into a wing of the house, bringing Sophie's energy, who quickly became everyone's joy. The conservatory was established in the rear pavilion, as William had dreamed years before. Soon it was welcoming children from all over the city, offering free lessons in piano, guitar, singing, and music theory. Michael coordinated the project with dedication, Catherine handled the educational part, and Emily taught the more advanced classes. Richard discovered he loved working with the children. Even without memories of being a teacher before, he had a natural ability for teaching piano. The children adored him, affectionately calling him Professor William. Robert and Daniel, true to their word, became actively involved in the family business. With guidance from the board of directors and financial stability ensured by the inheritance division, they managed to reorganize their lives and became respectable businessmen. One afternoon, almost a year after the day it all began, Richard was in the garden watching Sophie play when Emily approached. "Father, may I ask you something?" "Always, daughter." "Do you still miss the lost memories?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes I wonder what it was like to be the William from before. But honestly," he smiled, "I prefer who I've become. The man I was carried many sorrows and responsibilities. The man I am now learns to be happy every day." "And don't you miss the simple life of a janitor?" "That life had no love, daughter. There was security, routine, but there was no purpose." Richard embraced his daughter. "Now I wake up every day knowing I can make a difference in other people's lives." Michael approached, carrying some papers. "Dad, we have good news about the conservatory." "What news?" "The City Council approved our proposal to expand the project. We'll be able to serve another 100 children next year." Michael smiled proudly. "And 3 of our students were accepted into renowned conservatories with full scholarships." "Michael, that's wonderful." Richard embraced his son. "You're doing an amazing job." "We're doing it, Dad. All of us." Catherine appeared on the porch, calling for dinner. The family gathered around the large table, as they had done hundreds of times over the past year. Richard looked around, seeing the dear faces, Emily excitedly talking about her new students, Michael and Monica planning Sophia's future, Robert and Daniel, who came for dinner at least once a week, Catherine, who had become not just a colleague but a true friend. "Family," said Richard, standing up. "I want to make a toast." "What are we toasting to, Dad?" asked Emily. "To second chances, to families that find each other, to music that heals hearts." He raised his glass. "And to discovering that sometimes losing your memory can mean finding your soul." "Cheers," they all said in unison. After dinner, as had become tradition, the whole family gathered in the music room. Richard played the piano, Michael accompanied him, Emily sang, and even little Sophie contributed with her sweet little voice. Robert, who had discovered a talent for percussion, kept the rhythm, while Daniel and Monica sang along. Catherine, watching from her favorite armchair, smiled, thinking about how life had taken unexpected turns. The man she had fallen in love with 25 years ago had returned, not with the memories of the past, but with an even bigger and more open heart. When the music ended, Sophie ran to Richard's lap. "Grandpa, tell a story." "What story do you want to hear, my love?" "The story of the grandpa, who forgot who he was, but found a new family." Richard laughed, kissing his granddaughter's forehead. "Once upon a time there was a man who cleaned the floors of a big house," he began, picking Sophie up. "And he thought that was all. A simple man with a simple life. But one day, a beautiful young woman arrived and said he was her father." "And was he really?" asked Sophie, even though she already knew the story. "Yes, he was. And he discovered he had not only a daughter, but a son, a daughter-in-law, and the most beautiful granddaughter in the world." "And did they live happily ever after?" "They are living happily ever after," corrected Richard, looking around at his family. "Every single day." Later that night, when everyone had already gone to bed, Richard stayed alone at the piano. He softly played a melody that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, a piece he didn't know if it was a memory or a new creation. Emily came down to get a glass of water and found him playing. "Dad, what piece is that?" "It's beautiful." "I don't know, daughter." Richard continued playing. "Sometimes the music just comes, as if it had always been inside me, waiting to come out. Maybe it's the memories returning, in a different way. Maybe. Or maybe they're new memories being created." Richard stopped playing and looked at his daughter. "Emily, can I confess something?" "Of course. Sometimes I'm afraid that my old memories will return and I'll stop being who I am now." "Why would you be afraid of that?" "Because you all like who I am now, and I like it too." Richard sighed. What if the memories come back and I become that distant and melancholy man that Catherine described? Emily sat next to him on the piano bench. Dad, you can trust one thing. No matter what memories come back or don't come back, you will always be the man who chose to share your inheritance with cousins who attacked you. You will always be the man who dedicates his life to teaching music to underprivileged children. She took his hand. These choices define who you are much more than any memory from the past. Thank you, daughter. I needed to hear that. And Dad, if one day your memories return, and if they bring sadness, we will be here to remind you of all the reasons to be happy. Richard hugged his daughter, feeling a profound gratitude for having a family that loved him, not for what he had been, but for what he chose to be every day. The next morning, Richard woke up to the sound of Sophie practicing piano downstairs. At 4 years old, she could already play simple melodies that Michael had taught her. Richard smiled, thinking about how music truly was hereditary in the Parker family. He went downstairs to find the house full of life. Michael preparing coffee, Monica organizing her teaching materials, Emily reviewing sheet music, Catherine arranging the conservatory's activities. It was the organized chaos of a large, active family. "Good morning, family," said Richard cheerfully. "Good morning, Dad," they all replied in chorus. "Grandpa," shouted Sophie, running to hug his legs. "Today I'm going to play the new song Daddy taught me." "I can't wait to hear it, Princess." George, the gardener, appeared at the kitchen door. "Mr. William, the conservatory staff, has arrived. The children are in the garden waiting for classes to start." Richard looked out the window and saw dozens of children playing in the garden, eagerly awaiting their music lessons. They were boys and girls of all ages, from humble families who had discovered a passion and hope in music. "George, thank you. We're on our way." As the family headed to the conservatory pavilion, Richard reflected on the incredible journey he had lived. Just over a year ago, he was a lonely man who cleaned floors for a modest salary. Today, he was the patriarch of a musical family, director of a social project that transformed lives, and happier than he could ever have imagined. The memories of William Parker might never fully return, but Richard Johnson had discovered that he didn't need the past to build an extraordinary future. He had a talented daughter, a dedicated son, a caring daughter-in-law, an adorable granddaughter, nephews who had become partners, an old flame that had turned into true friendship, and dozens of children who saw him as a hero. Most importantly, he had music. The music that connected hearts, that healed sorrows, that created families where before there were only strangers. As he watched Michael begin the first lesson of the day, Richard smiled, thinking that perhaps his true identity had never been William Parker or Richard Johnson. Perhaps his true identity was simply being someone capable of loving and being loved, of teaching and learning, of building bridges where others saw only differences. The music from Michael's piano echoed through the garden, mixing with the children's laughter and creating the perfect soundtrack for a life that had begun with confusion and found its way to harmony. End of story. And you? What did you think of this story of new beginnings and discoveries? From where are you following us? If this story touched your heart in any way, leave your comment telling us what moved you the most. Do you believe that sometimes losing your memory can be the first step to finding happiness? We would love to hear your opinion. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.